I'm Matt.
Hey, I'm Steve.
Hey, I'm John.
This is the Sober Friends Podcast. We're here for the sober curious, the new guy, and the old timer. We're here to talk about the stuff anyone looking to live alcohol-free has to face day to day, and how we overcame those struggles. We speak for no 12-step group, but we do try to remain anonymous. You're not alone. This is the Sober Friends Podcast. I've never removed John's voice from the intro, and I bring it up because you can leave a comment on individual Spotify episodes of this podcast, and somebody did. Somebody left a comment on there because I talked about a podcast that I like to listen to where the host left and that feeling of lost. And they said, yeah, I felt the same way about John leaving. That it's three guys talking about recovery, and now John's not there, and I felt that loss. So it was on a recent episode, so it feels as though they're still listening, but I've just never had the energy nor the desire really to remove John from that. Maybe thinking he'll come back someday.
Come back, Shane. Come back.
So I don't know if he's listening still, but there are people who are still looking for you, and you've been gone like well over a year.
Hey, just a shout out to John. John celebrated 34 years of sobriety this past week. So just a shout out to him and to show you that this program can work long term. So,
oh yeah,
good job by John. So
John struggled for the first 5 years or so.
Oh yeah,
really struggled.
Yep. So, but he made it. So anyway, yeah, we miss him too. It was it was fun having the three of us here. But we're here.
Yeah, I would give you his address to go talk to him, but he'd come running out with his rifle, and it wouldn't be a pretty
maybe two handguns.
Yeah, he'd be like it's like Yosemite Sam with him at his house. 2 guns, a rifle, jumping up and down, hopping in the air. Our topic today is about who you tell you're in recovery. If we go to the AA model, the second A is anonymity. And there are a lot of strong feelings around, do you talk to anybody about it? What does anonymity mean? And there are some people in my life that I talk to about it, and some people I'm never going to talk to about it. How have you addressed this, Steve?
It all depends on where I was in my recovery, right? So when I first came into this program, it was 1995, tells you a little bit about how old I am. And I was, in my late 30s and just starting a newish job. And I was really close to the vest, right? Like it felt like there was too much to lose. It felt like I was very like, it was only my immediate family. And by that I mean, obviously my wife, who I was married to at the time, my mom and dad were alive, and my siblings. Like literally that was it. A couple cousins, some of my closest cousins, like 2 of them. I mean, I have 32 first cousins, right, on my father's side, or did have that. 2 of them that I used to hang out with and party with, like those 2 guys knew. But the rest of my cousins, like, and even to this day, I really haven't, not that it's changed. So early on, I was very much close to the vest with that. I didn't know. I didn't even tell my doctor. Right. And I didn't tell a lot of people because there was some stuff out there like, oh, if you tell your doctor, then it becomes like the insurance company can get that and they could raise your rates. And like there was a lot of that stuff that I was fearful of at that time.
We've talked about that, and I've never thought about that before. I remember we've talked about that before. It was a long time ago, and you're just bringing that back.
Yeah, it's just one of the things I remember, like, oh, yeah, I don't want to tell my doctor. Like, my doctor knew, right? He could see what was happening with my blood work. He knew it, and I knew he knew it, and he knew that I knew he knew it. But we just never discussed it. Now, whether he ever put it in my charts or anything like that, I don't know. But I never uttered those words to him. Today I do. Today he knows, and today we talk about it. I made the funny comment. I just had my physical in January, and he was asking me about, they always ask you about drug use or alcohol use, and I told him not at all. And he came across marijuana. He's like, are you using marijuana like the rest of the world is today? Right? And my answer to him was, if I could, I would. right? That was my answer to him. Like, if I could be using it, I would be using it, but I can't, so I don't. So anyway, so it's very, very different today than it was when I first came in.
There are these chain dispensaries all over Connecticut. I'm sure it's like that where you live. If cannabis has been legalized, it has been in Connecticut. There is this mall near where Steve and I live, and you can enter the mall from like two different sides. There's like the west side and the east side, and it's on two different exits of the highway. And there are dispensaries on both of those exits on either side of the mall, and there's like a third one up the street.
Right.
So apparently I'm in the wrong business. I should get into the cannabis business and get one of these franchises. Maybe there's some money to be had because, there's a lot of cannabis use being done.
Yeah.
Stigma on that is dropped. That was never for me. If my doctor were to ask me that, it would be no, because I don't like the feeling.
Yeah. No, I get it.
Instant paranoia.
I get it. So anyway, but like I said, it's very different now. I don't know. How did you handle it, Matt? Or how do you still handle it? And your anonymity?
I'm a little bit more open now. Up front, it was tough. There are people I told because I had to. Like, say we were staying with friends or family in somewhere like Rhode Island where my father-in-law had a place. I would tell some people out of necessity because I was going to meetings when I was there.
Yeah.
And I was more telling them because I'm going to disappear.
Right.
Here's where I'm going. So it was more about I will only tell the people that I have to tell. Now, it really kind of depends on where it'd be helpful. I didn't want to tell my brother-in-law, but I reached out to him because he's talked about wanting to curtail his drinking. And his message back was, no, I'm going to try something different. Okay. My sister-in-law, I am very concerned about her drinking. I am not going to have a conversation with her. I don't think it will go well at all. It would be one of those things where she would hold it over my head for the rest of my life.
Right. And that is one of the things that some people need to consider. I know I considered that too. It was like, first of all, again, today I can think about it more clearly. But who am I telling it to, and why do I feel the need to let that person know? And like I said, today I feel very differently about it. Like today, I'm very much open. Not so much that I'm in recovery, but I don't drink. And I will tell people when I think it's proper, when the conversation, like I'm just not going to say I don't drink and I'm in recovery, right? Just right off the bat. I don't say that to almost anybody. I do say I just don't drink. If the questions, if the conversations get going further and further, then I may say I used to drink, I can't drink anymore. I'll say something like, I used to drink, but it didn't work for me. Like that's one of my typical statements to a lot of people. It didn't work for me. Right. And then if there's a probing about why it didn't work, then I'll be happy to have that conversation. So I don't ever want to, talk to anybody. I've talked about there's some people locally in the neighborhood that every time I see these people, every time I see this one guy in particular, and I see him a lot because we walk dogs together, like he's always has alcohol in his breath. Like doesn't matter what time of day it seems like. It doesn't, I don't know about mornings. I don't see him in the mornings, but anytime in the afternoon, right? And like I'll meet him in the woods, like that's where we back up to woods, walk the dogs, and it'll be like 3:00, and he'll have his two dogs out, and we'll just run into each other. And he'll say, "Oh yeah, I got off work at 2:30." Now he got off work at 2:30. It's 3:00, and he's already smelling like alcohol, right? So, and he knows I don't drink. When I first met him, like he was always off because he's always like in the summertime, like he has a cooler in the back of his truck that always has something in it, right? Either it's and that's fine. And again, so I don't need to tell him. If the conversation ever comes up, I'd be happy to share it with him. But today, I always wonder, like what am I telling people for, and like what's the purpose of that? How do you handle work these days?
It depends. There are some people I've talked to about it when it comes up. I do a lot of multimedia at work.
Mm-hmm.
So because I have multimedia and I have all this equipment, people then ask me, well, do you podcast? I bet you do some podcasting. And I say I do. And if they probe further, I'll tell them I'm in recovery. I have
Right.
a podcast for supporting the sober community. And I kind of leave it like that. There are a lot of people who it goes right over their head.
Right. I agree.
Or they just don't care. I have brought it up when we talked about sort of an offsite. When I say an offsite, I work virtually. So these offsites are kind of like a special meeting where we've had icebreakers. And I brought it up in an icebreaker. And it turned out there were a whole bunch of people in that meeting who were also in recovery, who spoke up. People who had like 30, 40 years of recovery, who were rather young. And now I have a connection with some of those people. One of them was my boss's boss. And I have this connection with her, and we'll kind of meet up for like a one-on-one, and we'll just talk about recovery now, which it opened the door to a different conversation.
Yeah, and I do think that you find that today, again, I'm not sure if it was any different. Maybe my perception was different back in 95 in the late 90s when I first came in. But I do think that you find that there just seems to be more people who are open about it, and I think it's more accepted, right? Like there was a time, right? A lot of people were afraid that they'd get fired, right? If they knew that. Or, okay, it's the old thing, like when we read in our literature, once the, two employers, once somebody is known to be an alcoholic, then they don't show up for work, like that type of risk, you feel like a little bit less so today, I think, than it was in the past. So I think it's just way more accepted. And like you said, you run into people that you don't know. I had a very similar experience with something like that. I was in a business where I used to sell computer equipment, and I had this one guy who was local, but a big player in the business, and I knew him for a long time, and we would go out to lunch together and all this kind of stuff. And never knew he was in recovery. And then one day I go to a meeting, and in walks this fella, right? Like this is like I've known him for 20 years. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? And so we get talking about it, and it's like he had been in recovery for a long time, and I had just had no clue. It is nice to have those, right? It is nice to have those relationships. One of the other things I'll tell you is 2019, actually January 2020, I started working for the company I'm currently working for, and they're out of Toronto, and I went up there, and I leveled with my boss right from the beginning. Like, hey, I just want to let you know I'm in recovery. Like, I just wanted him to know right off the bat. Okay. Now, it just so happens that he's Muslim, and he doesn't drink, and a lot of the people that he employs are Muslim. They don't drink for the most part, as far as I know. And so it sort of fit that whole culture. But I did want him to know right off the bat. The other thing that happens is, like, now we do these regular meetings, and I don't use my podcast stuff when I do these meetings. So it's just a quick little Zoom meeting, so I don't use my podcast stuff. But my podcast stuff is visible. Mm-hmm. Right? And I've told them before, like, I do this. I've told a couple of them, like, oh, I do this podcast. Now I'm on this meeting with like 5 or 6 other people, and like one of the guys says, hey, you still doing your podcast? And I'm like, yeah, I'm still doing it, right? And so there is that same thing. People, it's the same thing with me too. People will say to me, or I may something, hey, I got to go home, I'm going to do a podcast. And a lot of people say, what kind of podcast do you do? And then I'm not going to lie to them. I say I do a podcast about recovery. And if that opens the door to more conversation, so be it. The thing I like about that is that I would hope that if they ever needed help, they would say, hey, I remember Steve telling me he does a podcast about recovery. Maybe I should just go talk to him, see what's going on. So, like I said, it's a little bit different today than it was. But yeah, I mean, today I think that maybe I could be helpful to some people. So
right.
A little bit more liberal with it. Not totally. I mean, I don't shout it from mountaintops, and I don't think it's anybody's business, but way more liberal than I used to be with it.
I am, I forgot the word there. I'm selectively liberal with it, depending on the situation where I think I could be helpful. When I had direct reports, I used to talk about it when I sensed a need. And in one of those people who reported to me, he ended up in rehab because of our conversation, and he got sober.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, there's no question about it. And I think that's a great way to put it. Selectively liberal, right? And it's the same thing I mean. Like I said, I always sort of get a feel for the situation. And then I put it out there. We talked about, we had a friend my wife's friend who had since passed away from this disease. And, we were very open that, my wife was one of the good friends. I'm sure my wife told her when we first got together. But, and eventually she came to me and asked for some help. And I gave her what help I could. It didn't work for her. But I gave her some help and showed her the program and took her to meetings and all that kind of stuff. So that's all I can do with that. And I do like that opportunity to be able to help people when I can.
You've told that story a number of times, and I like that you tell it a number of times. You never know when something is going to sink in, and repetition is really important. Yeah, I talk to people in my family sometimes. I don't know. Before my mom passed away, I never talked to her about it because I was afraid she would turn it on herself, and more about it would upset her that she was a bad mother. She did a lot of those things, that anything that something didn't go well with me, it was about her. And I didn't want to go down that. And I'm saying this as a way of some to save her some emotion, and some, she always made it about herself. Yeah. And I didn't want to have that conversation with her.
It's really interesting you bring that up. One of my regrets in life in general, but certainly in my recovery, is I've talked about I grew up, my mom was an alcoholic, and my mom got sober, for all I know, on her own, without any program at all. A bit of an intervention with me and my sister, but never went to rehab, never went to, just quit somewhat what seemed to be cold turkey. I don't know if it took her a while, whatever. And I never talked to my mom about it. And this was long, I was young. I was in my early 20s when this all came to be, when she quit. And by the time I became alcoholic and knew that I was alcoholic, it was 15 years later. It was a long time after that. I never talked to my mom about that. I never talked about my mom, about her being an alcoholic, about how she recovered, about me being an alcoholic. I don't know why. I really don't. It's interesting you bring that up. I think about that, like, why didn't I have those conversations with my mom? We shared that, and I don't know if it's the same thing. Like, I don't know if it'd be in the back of my head. Was I worried about that same thing, about my mom feeling bad about it? I don't know. It wasn't something in the forefront of my decision making, but I regret it today. Like, I never had that conversation. I wish I had. I wish I knew what she did. I wish she knew, like, what happened to her. I wish I knew her story, right? That's what I wish I knew. I wish I knew her story, and she certainly didn't know mine either, because my alcohol use mirrored hers. Maybe that's why I didn't. I don't know. Again, I'm sort of thinking this through as we talk, but it mirrored hers. My mom, like, she would drink just the way I drank, or I would drink just the way she drank. So I don't know if I felt like that would be hurtful to her or not. But like I said, it's one of my regrets that I never really talked to her. She knew I was in the program. She knew I was in recovery. One of the problems with that, like, my closest families didn't know how I drank. Like, they had no clue. Plus, I had moved away. I was still in the same state, but so the only time they would see me was at family gatherings, parties, stuff like that. They didn't see me on a day-to-day basis. And in those situations, I always drank socially for the most part, unless it was a really get drunk party, which we had plenty of those too. So it was sort of a shock to a lot of the people closest to me when I first came in these rooms.
I've told some family members and sat down with them, and then they've forgotten, I guess. I had this long conversation with my father-in-law, and then there's been so many times that my father-in-law's holding a beer, and he comes, "Here!" and he throws it right in my face. I'm like, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I forgot that you don't like beer anymore." No, that's not what it is. It's, I like it too much.
Right.
He did that recently, within the last year or so. He threw a glass of beer in my face.
I've had that happen where people, not so much they forget, but they ask that question, "Hey, you still not drinking?" you know? And again, some of that was because I just told them I wasn't drinking more than I was in recovery. But today, like I said, today it's very different. Today, my high school, like I got a bunch of high school friends that we get together with, and they're all big. Some of them, a couple of them are big. I shouldn't say they're all big. They're not. A couple of them are pretty good drinkers. But there's another guy who, like me, is in recovery. He's been in recovery for a long time. So we always chit chat together. We have open conversations now, right? Like we'll be sitting there, we'll talk about our programs and stuff like that. But that was something I didn't do for years. Like these are some of my closest friends, and I still didn't tell them. Like one of the things I didn't want to tell them, I never want to ruin anybody else's drinking. I really don't. I mean that. Like I don't want to, right? Like have, be sitting there when everybody's having a good time and then go, oh no, I can't drink because I'm in recovery. And then like have it ruin their night. Like I'm not interested in doing that. Like it's not for me to do. So certain situations I do stay away from it.
All right, I'm going to go on a little bit of rant here. It's funny that you said that because I am not against alcohol. If you can drink appropriately and you can utilize booze without being an addict, go for it. It has nothing to do with me. I believe in alcohol is inert to me. It's not for me, but I'm not going to make any judgments. And there is this asshat on social media who is raging about the health benefits that you shouldn't drink. And this guy posted something about Taylor Swift chugging a beer at the Super Bowl.
Right.
And even I commented on this, that he said something along the lines of she's advocating alcohol and this is bad, it's bad for you. And it went in and like, if she doesn't have a problem, who cares? How do we know that it's not a non-alcoholic beer? What do we know about that? And this guy got absolutely hammered. And then like the next day, he's in the Daily Mail with an article about him saying, the Swifties have tried to cancel me for my opinion. I'm like, come on. Like you set that up knowing you could get a newspaper article.
Right.
So it's just reminding me of, I don't have an issue with people drinking. And that should be the healthiest response of, if I'm out to dinner and other people want to have a drink, I shouldn't raise my hand and say, you shouldn't drink because of me. Because if alcohol is, whether you have alcohol in front of me or not, there are ways for me to get alcohol if I truly want it. That's just an excuse to me.
Right.
So I have to be in a healthy place where people can have booze around me and it doesn't affect me.
I'll take it even a step farther than that. I don't even care if people are problem drinkers or alcoholics. Like it's not my place. I mean this honestly. It's like, it's not my place to judge those people. In that situation, maybe I mentioned something about my recovery, but that's it. Like like I said, I'm not there to save anybody. I'm not out here to save anybody. So, I'll bring up that thing like my friend there, like my wife's and I friend. Like I saw all that happening. She knew, like I didn't try to save her. So I don't even care about people drinking. Listen, a lot of people out there, like I said, a couple of these high school friends that I have, they drink hard at times. At times they drink hard. Now again, I have no idea how they drink Monday through Fridays, how they drink after I leave. I know how I drank, right? And my point was I would always drink hardest when nobody was around, So I see these guys and it's like, I don't know, they seem to have an okay life. They don't seem to have a problem. They certainly at times drink too much. They probably drink and drive. Like they do some of these behaviors that aren't good. But it's not my place to judge them or try to fix them or try to encourage them to change that. It's really not. I do know that if these guys had a problem, they know enough that if they wanted to talk to me about it, they could. That's what I know, right? Yep. If they wanted to talk to me like, hey, what's going on? How did you know? When did it become a problem for you? What did you recognize? Like if that conversation, if they wanted to have that, they know they could have that with me. And other than that, like we're fine. Like we, a lot of times, like we get together. Last year we got together over a friend's house in Rhode Island. People stayed there because they wanted to drink as much as they wanted to, right? people stayed over, So it's up to them. Like I said, I'm not here to judge, just like you. I'm not here to judge. And I have my own. It's my issue. I get it. It's my issue with alcohol. I understand that. And today I know that. And when I'm uncomfortable around alcohol, and that could be anywhere, could be with my wife. My wife still has some glasses of wine here and there. There's times where, like, for some reason, I just smell that wine. I literally pick up her glass and move it so that I don't smell it. And
I am that way with wine.
Yeah, or I'm be like, I just can't do whatever it is. Like, I'm protective of me, but not bothered by them. If my wife wants to drink, I talked to her many times. She can buy a bottle of wine. It could sit in the fridge for 3 or 4 days as she has a glass a night. It couldn't sit there for 30 minutes for me. I mean that honestly.
No, alcohol is my drug of choice, but my real drug of choice was wine.
Yeah,
and I had no defense against wine. That just went down. I wish I was more like you and not judgy. But I know as a character defect, when I see problem behavior, I am very judgy about it. I don't speak up, but I'm thinking about it in my mind. It bums me out. Give me an example. I had a 6-hour drive this week for a volleyball tournament down to Lancaster, Pennsylvania. A long drive through parts of Pennsylvania where there was nothing there. And we came back to the hotel, and one of the teams was staying there. I think there are probably maybe 12 people on each volleyball team. So if you've got 1 or 2 parents there, you do the math. And we walked back into the hotel maybe 9 o'clock. And as I'm walking in, they're kind of gathered in the hotel lobby. And my son counted 3 bottles of wine, and there was one individual talking, and he had his arm around a pyramid of Miller Lite cans. They were all like pyramided up, but he had his hand on them. And I could see the body language of, these are my Miller Lights. Do not touch them. Yeah. And we got to the elevator, and Owen was laughing. He couldn't even hold it in because he picked up on all of it. And I was really like, why? Why are you doing this? Why do you need to have this much wine? Because we came back from a team dinner, and where our team was staying, I couldn't get into that hotel. And we had Domino's pizza. And we walk into this one, and they're like pouring wine, and Owen's like, they are not going to be in a good place tomorrow.
Yeah.
They're going to have a tough time. And yeah, it bummed me out, and I was judgmental about it. And I struggle with that I see problem behavior, or my opinion of problem behavior, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't say I don't see it. I don't even say I don't judge it at time. I just know it's not my place to do anything about it. Like, I don't need to be involved with it. If I see really bad behavior, or if I see some of my friends doing some of that stuff, I'm concerned about them for sure. I really am. But it's just not my place. Like I said, not my place to fix them or to offer them help unless they're asking me. I mean, that's a big point I'm making. It's not my place to sort of offer them help.
Gotcha.
I'll tell you something that it just I remember my class senior trip. That was a long time ago now. And I'll never remember. We were in Pennsylvania, too. Matter of fact, we were going to Hershey Park. And I can remember getting to the hotel, and then, we were all seniors, and I was 17, and I was drinking and drug using by that point of my life. And I just remember, like, the chaperones. I can remember this one hotel that we stayed at, like, all the chaperones were in the bar. And I can remember them laughing and drinking and having a good time. And it's like, that's what chaperones did, right? And this is back in the mid-'70s. So it's like they were there having a good time. And a lot of people at these type of, club volleyball or club sports, right? It's a way to go out there. People do that. And again, it's a social thing, right? For a lot of them, it's just social things. So,
right.
It's not a big deal. Just as a side note, I just saw a comedian going through social media, and he talked about how parents take their kids all over the place at club sports these days. He's like, wait a minute, my reward My reward for working 50-hour weeks is to drive all across and spend my whole weekend driving you to tournaments. And it was funny because I just looked at that, and my daughter played club soccer, so it was like, yeah, I remember those weekends, where you went out and drove and spent the whole weekend doing tournaments. So
some of the drives are not that far. I've had to stay overnight in Providence. This week we'll be staying overnight in Boston. This is the one that was the 5-6 hour drive. That was a long haul. And yeah, that is my reward. But it actually is my reward because I get that one-on-one time with my son.
Right. I don't disagree with that.
And the fact that he came walking in last night and said, I really had a good time this weekend and walked out. For him at 15 to say that to me is a big deal. It
is. It is a big deal at that age that you're able to do that kind of stuff. Is it school vacation week for you guys?
Sort of. It's like they get Friday and Monday off.
Okay.
That's their school vacation.
I wasn't sure yet. Yeah. But you're right. There is an advantage to that, especially when you have 3 kids at home.
These 2 girls, first of all, it would have been a lot of money, especially at Boston coming up to take the whole family. I just took them. Second of all, an 11-year-old girl and a 9-year-old girl going to outside of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, if you know the area around Lancaster, or anywhere in like the Lehigh Valley down there, there's nothing.
No, there's nothing.
There is the biggest cornfields that I've ever seen in my life. Right. I thought it would be better than going up to Burlington, Vermont. And as we're driving home, the National Weather Service sent these alerts that shut your phone off 3 times because we were driving into these massive snow squalls that just like came across. It was blinding and not. So I'm glad I took them. And then it's like the whole weekend was leave the hotel, go to the volleyball tournament, be there all day, maybe get dinner, go home, go to sleep. That's all we did.
Yeah. The most famous quote that I've always loved about Pennsylvania was back in one of the elections, presidential elections. I don't know if it was Bill Clinton or whatever, but it was James Carville. And James Carville described Pennsylvania like this. He said, Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between.
Yes.
Right? And it just showed it because it is. That's the whole thing about Pennsylvania, right? It's so rural in between those 2 cities. And I guess obviously there's pockets of other thing in there. But it's just such a rural place. And it's big. It's a fairly big state.
Very
especially
big.
When you get up to the east there. So
we were 25 miles from the south. If you consider the Mason-Dixon line the south.
Right.
There was this, I was giggling because there's this one gas station we kept going by, Sheetz, Sheetz. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Yeah.
And it's a huge gas station.
Oh, yeah.
With a sit-down restaurant inside.
Yeah. Actually, when we drove out to, where did we drive? I guess we drove out to, that's what it was. We drove out to Chicago for the wedding a couple years ago in October. Yeah, and we stopped at one. We had a hotel, and right next to it was this huge Sheetz, gas station, restaurant, truck stop. It had everything. It's huge. They're all huge. Yeah. They're big. They're big out that way, and I forget where we were. I think we were in Ohio at that point, which Ohio, Pennsylvania, pretty close.
Oh yeah. Well, I hope you can identify with this episode. If you have, send an email, matt@soberfriendspod.com. I learned this week that you can put a comment on each episode. If you listen on Spotify, do that. I get a notification, and I'll put the comment up there for you, and I'll read it. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts, 5-star review, hopefully, with what you love about the podcast. Instagram is @SoberFriendsPod, and you can join the mailing list. I'm doing now on the mailing list like a little bit of an essay. It is usually associated with the podcast, but something about what it means to me, and I hope it's something that you would enjoy. You get the opportunity going to SoberFriendsPod.com to sign up for our newsletter. It keeps us in touch, and especially with social media being all over the place. I think nobody thought that Twitter would go sideways even maybe a year and a half ago, and what a cesspool. I don't go there. So you never know that, like, if social media goes down someday, we still have a way of connecting. Steve, thanks for doing this with me today.
Hey, Matt, you're welcome. Great to be with you.
We'll see everybody next week. Bye, everybody. You made it this far into the podcast. That tells me you're a pretty big fan. If you like what we do and you find value in the podcast, consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod. Your donation keeps us on the air to help out the new guy and helps us defray some of our costs. If you find value in our podcast, please consider a donation at buymeacoffee.com/soberfriendspod.